Hello and welcome to my next video, which is about denominations, sects, cults and churches. So this video is really going to be about half the lesson that we actually did. So when we were in lesson, we did some really good recap activities involving a table. So obviously if you missed this lesson, let me know and I'll give you those resources to complete at home. So the main focus of today's video is just to really introduce and discuss cults. And because we've done all the typologies for churches, sects and denominations, this is really today where we're going to focus on cults as a new religious movement. Now, just a quick little recap really in terms of what we covered already. So have a little ponder of this. The Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints here. Now, when we're looking at this for typology, if we're in the UK, this is obviously going to fall into a sect, whilst in the US, it's a denomination. This is because within the UK, we believe that this is highly more deviant in nature than that of than mainstream religion. Meanwhile, for the US, it's a lot more accepted and it can be seen within other types of religion. Therefore, it would be classified as denomination because it's not as subversive as we think. Now, the reason why I've covered that is because with Alan Aldridge here, he argues that there are some groups that have a very ambiguous position, meaning that from one country to another, the definition or classification of the denomination or sect will change. And obviously, the example which we can see is the one that we've seen in the previous slide, the LDS or the Mormons, and where they just do not have a clear definition as to where they fall. While Steve Bruce really argues that churches and sects are now drifting into the category of denomination, purely because obviously churches are becoming highly more secularized as a result, drifting away from the state. Meanwhile, sects becoming a lot less deviant, so becoming more accepted as a result. So they are drifting towards that more denomination point of view. Now, why are we talking about this? Is because the typologies, the definitions that we've been looking at, are constantly changing. And there's an increasing need for us to constantly look at the ambiguous situations some of these religious groups fall into and see if there's actually a problem with the typology and whether we may need to revise it. Now, Wilson in 1982 here states that Trotsky's definition of a sect is only suitable for earlier decades of the 20th century, as it does not take into account the emerging characteristics of alternative religious groups in the US and UK that emerged in the 60s and 70s. Because as we know, there was a range of groups that really came into society and started to take a dominant point of view and drew a lot of people into it. Meaning the typology of church, denomination, sect didn't work as well as it once did. Meaning we need to start to possibly revise it and add another category. Now, this is really where the rise of the cult started to happen. We created this fourth typology, the cult. Now, this is to distinguish and classify these new religious movements that started to pop up in the 60s and 70s and categorize them as a sect or a cult. And obviously, each one of these are going to have very different understandings of what they are looking for in terms of the religious movement. Now, Trotsky's definition, as we know, may have included some of the common features of a cult rather than a sect. So therefore, we're going to look at some of the definitions now. Now, cults are defined as loosely organised grouping without any sharp boundaries and no exclusive system of belief. So they are open and flexible. They are not rigid in the guidelines which are applied. Beliefs are common themes of ideas, so you join the cult because everyone has got the same ideology or the same belief system overarching. As well as that, members can also contribute to the overall narrative or discourse of the cult, meaning they can contribute to creating and rounding the ideology which is preached. It's open to new recruits and makes no demands that members need to abandon previous beliefs. So obviously this is a point which is actually quite different to what most people believe with cults. Cults are not always so extreme as to asking everyone to abandon their beliefs. They can often operate alongside their mainstream belief system, and there is no central organisation. So there's no hierarchy, etc., leading someone into the belief system. Now, the beliefs in a cult can be remarkably diverse, so they may have a range of ideologies which are dominant within members' thinking, etc. They are tolerant and accept the existence of other belief systems. So very different to a sect, because they recognise that there are other beliefs out there and they can acknowledge them as well. The example of this is the UFOs and aliens cult, which central belief is that individuals believe in the existence of aliens and UFOs, but they do not need to abandon previous belief systems in order to become members of this cult. Now, one of the main differences between a sect and a cult is that of membership and guidelines, as they know that the guidelines are flexible, meaning and that they have no clear rules on how they should behave in terms of being supporters. In addition to this, they are, rather than being believers, they tend to be customers because they have bought the services of organisation but are not required to have any great commitment to it. Obviously, a good example of this is with Scientology, which provides a good access for members to be provided with a therapy style organisation which will help them overcome any boundaries that they face in their life and help them to self-actualize and meet their full and true potential. Obviously, this is where that customer ideology comes in because they have to buy into it rather than just be automatic members to it. Now, Bruce reaffirms this definition by stating that a cult is a loosely knit group organised around some common themes and interests, lacking any sharply defined and exclusive belief systems, as previously stated. Now, Stark and Bainbridge in 1985 offer an alternative definition to what a cult can be defined as. They describe them as an organisation that has beliefs that are novel for a particular society. They are different and they're unusual. So cults haven't broken away from the mainstream beliefs. Instead, they have devised a completely new set of beliefs or imported beliefs or religious tradition from an outside society, which has been brought in and has been used to attract people into that particular grouping. So, for example, some cults can be based off belief system of science fiction. So, our example of that is Scientology. As we know with Scientology, it's based off of the book by Ron Hubbard called Dianetics, which provides the main fundamental beliefs of Scientology, which helps people overcome the problems which they face in their lives. Some of the important religions, like Buddhism, into Western society, can also seem as a cult, because it's a novel belief system, which obviously treats and encourages a good passive nature within individuals. Now, do Jedis fit into Stark and Bainbridge's definition? Why? Yes, they do, because it's based off of a science fiction idea first, so similar to that of Scientology. And as well as that, it provides a novel belief system for individuals to believe in. Obviously, treating the idea of yin and yang into it, so light and dark, good and evil, bringing that idea into it and teaching people how they can be extremely good and how they can observe and be the best versions of themselves, as it were. So it does fit into that definition in which Stark and Bainbridge provides for us. Now, Wallace has developed two typologies of religion, one of religious organisations in general and one of new religious movements. He distinguishes churches, denominations, sects using four categories, and we're going to look at those four categories now. Now, the four categories are as following. So, respectable, they're seen as conforming to the main norms and values of society. Deviant, they are not seen as conforming to the norms and values of society. Uniquely legitimate, so they believe they have the only true religion and no other beliefs should be accepted. Pluralistically illegitimate, they accept the right of the other belief system to exist. Now, we're going to look at the little table in which they produced. Now, obviously we can see here, this is the table that Wallace produced for us, and we can see that obviously in terms of it, uniquely legitimate. So obviously when they're fitting respectable, so that's the church. So the church obviously believes that they have the monopoly of the truth there, as well as do sects. However, you can see that church is respectable, so tend to be mainstream society, whilst sects tend to be seen as more deviant. Pluralistic legitimate, so they accept the belief systems of others. Denominations are obviously there, and they're in the respectable column, while cults are seen within the deviant column. Now, you can see with this line graph here in terms of new religious movements that have emerged, and frequency in terms of cults, you can see that from the 1820 there, that cults really started to increase substantially, and they started to gather some pace here. Now, the problems with this is the word cult, it has become increasingly stigmatized, which means that, okay, can we call them all cults, or do we need to break it down further? Now, the word cult has been a part of popular discussion, but tends to be used as a derogatory term, very negative in its sense. So, for example, cults are accused of brainwashing or kidnapping those who join them. They are often accused of financial, sexual, and political deviance. When we were doing this exercise in class, you know, many of you fed back with the ideas that, okay, they are a group which operate with very cloak and hooded style stuff, who operate with sacrifices, have ram's heads on display, etc., and are very deviant in nature. Now, due to the original sociological meaning, it's now being obscured by its contemporary society, and it's labelled by this religious deviance. A new neutral term has started to become birthed, which is the new religious movement. However, this is a term, it can be misleading in itself, meaning a clearer division of this term is needed so that we know exactly what we're looking at. Now, due to the term cult becoming increasingly unclear, and with the rapid growth of smaller religious organisations such as since the 70s, a new typology is needed, which is the new religious movement. Wallace comes up with 3 types of new religious movements. We've got world rejecting new religious movement, world affirming new religious movement, and world accommodating new religious movement. Now, I'm going to cover this more in the next video, so obviously keep an eye out for that, and we'll have a bit more of an explanation for those. But that's the end of today's video. Thanks for listening.